I'm joined, as I am every month, by our own Dr. Joe Sirven of the Saturday WJCT program. What's health got to do with it? Welcome, Dr. Joe.
Welcome, Ann. It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you too. Dr. Joe is here to talk medical news, but he's here also to answer your healthcare questions on any topic. You can reach us at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So, Dr. Joe, I have a bunch of questions about this topic, and our listeners might too. We're talking about do not resuscitate orders, or DNRs. They are designed to prohibit certain interventions if someone is dying. But as we've discussed, they're not always observed correctly. What's going on?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the fact that when these orders are being looked at, and let me kind of go back a little bit. So a lot of times when people have this do not resuscitate, this is their wishes of not wanting to have CPR or be put on a ventilator. Those are the most common things I can think of. The issue that arises is when an ambulance shows up at your house in the middle of an emergency, or when you show up in the emergency room and then the chart isn't open. Let's say that you're working fast. The medical team rushes to address the emergency. They may not have access to knowing that that person is not DNR. So the de facto response then is you do everything possible until that fact is revealed. I don't think it's so, at least I believe from just personal experience, it's not so much overlooking it as much as that you're so in the moment of taking care of the person that the fact that they're not DNR has not come through. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't situations where people override them for whatever reason, but in most cases, it's just the emergency situation itself. It's not available. It's not known to the people taking care of them.
And so that's a circumstance, as we say, where it can be overlooked or maybe it's not known at the outset. But there are also circumstances that we've learned where doctors just don't observe them. And that can happen in surgery, in surgical settings. So explain why a doctor might set aside somebody's known do not resuscitate order in a surgical context.
It's because I think in a surgical context, let's say that someone is in the middle of an operation. A couple things may happen. The anesthesia, something's not right. There's an allergy to it, to a drug or something like that. And you could choose not to treat it, but that would seem wrong because you know you can fix that immediately versus a situation where you are worried that they're not going to wake up. In other words, there are all these other gray zone scenarios of things that you could rapidly change. An allergy response, low blood pressure that you could just change by giving them fluids. That's life-saving. And so you don't necessarily count it under the do not resuscitate order. In other words, there's a lot of gray zone in that interpretation unless the person, the patient, has exactly specified all of these different circumstances. And secondly, the person's under anesthesia, so you don't know what they're thinking.
Right. Although I know from personal experience that there are doctors who just straight up say, if something happens in a surgical setting, we're going to do what we need to do, regardless of your wishes. Is there some sort of just desire not to have it happen on their watch or on their surgical table or on their medical records at the hospital? I mean, does the hospital get dinged because somebody died in surgery versus later on with a DNR?
The answer is that yes, the statistics are tracked by places like Medicare and federal agencies that do look at mortality from OR. Every surgeon in the United States is tracked with regards to their complication rates, and a fatality would certainly do that. But I think for the vast majority of people that I've met, again, this is more anecdotal, it's just more about how they interpret this. No one wants to get involved in a lawsuit, or they think, let's just do this. It's easier to just proceed to honor this unless it's explicitly stated.
Yeah. And I want to talk about a different kind of order in a
Sure.
minute. That's a a physician ordered document essentially. But if you have a call or question for Dr. Joe Sirven, or if you know somebody who had a DNR that was not observed, we would love to hear from you. You can call us at 904-549-2937, or you can email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. Before we get to those physician orders, I want to ask you about CPR in particular. That's one thing that a do not resuscitate order typically says, I don't want CPR.
Right.
One of the difficult realities about CPR that people sometimes don't realize is that its survival rate is incredibly low. So people on television typically survive a CPR, situation 75% of the time. Most people believe it's successful about 70% of the time. But the reality is, outside a hospital setting, it's about 7 or 8%.
Right. And if your family member is in that 7 to 8%, then it is all the world. But it's still something that can be done. And it's an option. But yeah, it is not if the person's extremely frail, if it goes wrong, you can have broken bones, teeth, whatever that can occur with it. And that is a risk. But I still believe, like, at least for that person in which it saved their life, it's still something that you can do without medication. And it just depends on the circumstance. If you choose not to have that, why is that case? I assume it's because they're frail, or because they're at a place that they're worried about what they would look like on survival. But I guess the reason I'm saying that is I want to make sure I come stating that CPR is so important, and it is a tool just in general public that can be life-saving for that percentage, even if it's small. But if you're in a situation where surviving will not be meaningful, well, that's what that DNR order is for.
I read an astonishing statistic, though, in preparation for this. It said as many as half of the patients who survive CPR wish they hadn't, because their quality of life is so diminished, because there's been cognitive damage and or physical damage, as you say.
Yeah. So one of the things that when you are using CPR, you're in a situation where the person is found down. They're not breathing. Their heart is stopped. That means that things such as oxygen to the brain, that you're taking hit. That the longer you're out without circulation to the blood, to the brain, and in that area, the longer that you have a chance that you're going to take a hit from a cognitive standpoint. And I can see where people may say that. But there are others. Again, I'll always cling to the ones that it's made a meaningful difference to, that have a different opinion.
Sure. So let's talk about these orders that can be created for people. It stands for...
It's portable medical orders. I don't know why it has the acronym of PULSed. So I've tried to work it out, but stands for portable medical orders. This is a slight difference from DNR in that it's a signed order with a physician, and you're present, and you, in essence, saying, if this were to happen to me, if this is the circumstance, I only want comfort care, or I only want this. And those are different when it's a signed order, because the EMT and the ambulance will have to kind of look and honor them. The hospital that receives them, the emergency room, will have to look at them. It's a better conversation. It is something that you would sit down with your physician or other provider to lay out. And it's a little clearer than the DNR, because you're trying to eliminate some of those gray zones, and it has more of a legal aspect to it, because of the fact that they are orders.
Doctor's order, yeah.
Exactly.
And so you could say, I want nutrition, I want dialysis, but I don't want to be intubated, I don't want CPR, and you can kind of break it down.
You can break it down. The issue that arises with this is just having the conversation overall. So many of us just feel uncomfortable going over this, but it is vital, especially if you're in a situation where you have a terminal illness, or you're very sick, or a family member,
or you're going into surgery.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're talking to Dr. Joe Sirven. He is the host of the Saturday show on WJCT, What's Health Got to Do with It? And he gives us a monthly house call. He's here now to take your calls and questions on any healthcare topic. And we're also talking about the big medical headlines. So I want to move on, if we can, to talk about COVID recommendations from the state. We have just gotten, for the third straight year, the health department has recommended against getting the FDA approved mRNA COVID vaccine.
And if you can see me now, my head is down, my eyes are closed as I process that. Here's what I have to say in general. Talk to your primary care doctor. That's where most of us make our decisions about this. I know what the state of Florida health department has said about their concerns about the vaccines and boosters. Talk to your doctor. They know you. They know when you should get your vaccine. That's what I do. I did get, just so for full disclosure, I got my COVID booster. I got my flu shot. We're in that zone in that season. I would rather get the vaccine than not. But if you are one of those people have an issue with the vaccine, or someone who is immunocompromised who needs to get this is why your primary care doctor or provider is most helpful. Listen to them. Would be my suggestion.
But it's confusing, I would guess, when the state recommendation is different from the CDC, which does recommend getting it.
And that's why at the end, when we're in the state of Florida, I'm like, talk to your doctor. They know what they should be doing for you, for your own best health.
Yeah. All right. Another topic. This is something that is moving away from a BMI measurement of weight or obesity. It's something called the body roundness index. What is this?
So this is interesting. So a lot of people and professionals don't like the BMR, the body mass index, because it seems to throw a lot of similar folks into a category of obesity when it shouldn't. So they've come out with something called the body roundness index. And the idea here is that instead of looking at weight versus height, they do waist versus height. Now, I have tried to figure it out for myself. I can't. I went down to the original study that was recently published in JAMA, a Journal of American Medical Association. I can't seem to figure out the formula just yet. They wanted more information that I was willing to give on a website. But it is an interesting one because it says that the folks who have these certain body types with huge waists, they're the ones that have a certain amount of fat that puts you at more risk, as opposed to a BMI, which just takes the height versus weight. And some people who are more muscular or have a certain body type, they're healthy, but their BMI just registers as too high.
I want to take a call from Ricky on the north side. Good morning, Ricky. Go ahead.
Good morning. Yeah, I'd like to find out or let to know what Dr. Sirven believes in the interference of government on medical issues, particularly when it concerns COVID-19. In other words, there's a denial by the government that it exists, and, especially Florida, Governor DeSantis. And I want to know what his take on it, because now doctors are going to be prosecuted if they help a person in an emergency situation that needs an abortion. So that's my question. Thank you.
Politics and healthcare.
Oh my goodness.
No shortage of it.
No, we could spend a whole show on this topic alone. I'll just start with this. At the end of the day, when I see someone, and I know this from many of my colleagues I've worked with in multiple states, from Florida to multiple other locations, we try to do our very best. If someone has COVID, I listen to the big recommendations from studies, from whether the CDC, the NIH, and things of that sort, and I will do my best. Yes, when it gets into the issue, I just heard the word of abortion and emergency care, that opens up a whole world of concern. And that is why there is a lot of concern about what to do in emergency situations. And I'll just say, for years, we didn't have anyone involved in that. We want to get back to that. And I'll just state it like that. And that the easiest should be you and your doctor, and both of you making that decision. you and your provider, if you have a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant, just to be super clear, that's where the decision needs to be made.
We've got a call from Charles on the west side. Good morning, Charles. Go ahead.
Good morning, Dr. Joe. I and everybody else, I had a DNR that I guess requested, I don't know is the right word, when I was hospitalized back during Irma. And my dad got really upset and told the doctor to remove it. And then when they came back to me and told me, wait, how can he remove that? Because he's not, I had my mom listed as the next of kin. But long story short is we compromised where I specified I didn't want any heroic measures being taken, the CPR and about the broken bones and all that. And we compromised on that. So that's what happened with my situation.
Interesting. Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, Charles, and I love, thank you for calling in on that. I mean, at the end, you hit what the whole point of that whole pulsed or portable medical orders is. You found a compromise. You actually went into the nuances. And I think that's how we make sure that things are more likely to be kind of acknowledged by the medical team, is that you address those nuances. You compromise, but you brought up an interesting situation where the family members don't agree with a decision made by the person. It belongs to the person who, it's your life, basically.
Right. We've got a call from Dave in Avondale. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. I was involved in the Georgia Memorial Society, which is all about end-of-life discussions. And I wanted to mention the fact, the difference between a DNR, should not resuscitate, versus let die naturally. And let die naturally is more of a holistic approach that includes do not resuscitate. And so I wanted to have you talk about that. I also have always thought about POLST being the physician's order of life-saving treatment rather than portable.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for bringing up that point. It is a very important one. It gets back to what I was saying about nuance and getting into the detail. Do not resuscitate, as basically as it states, to not do any life-saving measure. But the key there is that it still has some open for interpretation by the medical team as to how that works. While DNI, I like that one. Do not intubate. That's very clear. Don't put a tube in my mouth. As for the pulse, what's changing now is that it's trying to just have this broader manner of hitting all the different possibilities. A tube in my mouth, a ventilator. Do I get antibiotics? What about IV nutrition? What about a tube in my stomach for nutrition? I could go down in all the different possibilities, but these are trying to just kind of really bring clarity as to what is acceptable. And again, the onus is on us. That's you and me as patients to have that out. And again, the portable orders is signed by the medical professional because it's done as part of a conversation that can move from place to place. Now, it's a movement. It hasn't completely settled everywhere, but they have good representation in most states at this time.
It's worth mentioning, too. I mean, I understand that EMTs, first responders, are trained to look at the front of your refrigerator to see if you have a do not resuscitate order. But I was speaking to a coworker here who ran into this circumstance with her mother. They didn't have a refrigerator in her room. I mean, she was in a nursing home. And so those orders didn't get transmitted. And so there can be confusion even when it seems like a really kind of cut and dried directive.
And I'll share like a personal anecdote. I had it like with one of my family members, and this person was in a nursing home, almost the same situation. They fell, and I'm the one who accompanied them to the emergency room. This is years ago, and arguing back and forth. Do we admit when this person had signed something of what they don't
Arguing
want?
with the doctor.
With the doctor, a doctor to doctor, I'm like pointing out this issue. if and it hits me now, like if I, as a medical professional, I'm in the middle of an argument over the same issue, we have a problem. So it's not easy. We're trying to find ways, at least the system's trying to find ways to address that.
All right, switching back to this BRI, this body roundness index,
Yes.
I just think it's so interesting because there was recently this kind of viral issue of the Olympic rugby player, Ilana Maher. She has a BMI of 30, which is technically kind of
Obese.
obese, right?
Yes.
I read somewhere that if you follow just the strictest BMI old-fashioned standard, that Arnold Schwarzenegger during his, heyday as a bodybuilder would have been obese, even though he had like a 31-inch waist and, his kind of massive upper body. So it doesn't apply to everybody in appropriate ways sometimes.
No, it doesn't. And that's where it's like why this is turned into a concern, and maybe this is the improvement. Now, having done that, when I still see my own physician, I'm still measured on a BMI because that's still considered the standard.
Yeah.
But BRI is an interesting approach. We'll see if it gets adopted to that direction, because they have studies that show, which number will get you to a place that you are worried about the risk of death and heart disease. There's a lot of those studies for BMI, but as you just said, BMI is not perfect as it comes to this.
We are talking to Dr. Joe Sirven about the latest medical headlines, one of which is man flu. And if you have a question about that, you can reach us at 904-549-2937, or you can you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. All right, Joe, you're getting a chuckle out of this, but for real, man flu, does it exist?
Okay, as a guy, as a man, let me stand up for all of us here. This is not one of those that I would put a lot of stock in. Now, the concept here is that men have a weaker immune system than women, and therefore more susceptible to disease. And it's believed that this is related to two things. Testosterone makes you more immune weak. That may be true. As well as the concern of the chromosome, because men have an XY and women have XX, and that less of an X makes you less prone. But yet, if you look at statistics, women, and this may be health system or it may be biologically, when they present with an illness, I mean, they have more complaints and more issues that occur. So I have trouble swallowing that men are more immunologically sensitive, if you will, based on this. There may be pieces of that may have some truth to it, but I don't know, from my own waiting room and experience, that's not what I say. I'd say it's an equal game, as opposed to that it's one thing. I will point out the reason I laughed is that there was a well-known story published in the British Medical Journal, if I remember correctly, on this topic, and they try to use it as a way to make a case that when men are sick, they need to be put in man caves just to protect them away from women and everyone else, based on this topic. And I remember, the British, I love them. I'm gonna respectfully disagree on this finding.
All right, man flu. It may not be as real as science says. Dr. Joe Sirven, it's a pleasure to have you here every month. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us once again.
This has been a true pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And don't forget to listen to Dr. Joe every Saturday. He is on at 4 o'clock with What's Health Got to Do with It on WJCT.